All right, guys, I'm here with Daniel. Fan of the show, first time on the show. Really happy to be here. Really happy to talk. How are you doing today, Daniel?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. We're going to talk about Jonathan Taylor, his overall draft profile, where we think he's going to go in the NFL draft, some possible landing spots. We're going to talk about that at the end of the video. But before then, we're going to talk about just kind of what he did in college, what he is as a prospect, and what we can kind of expect. And first off, I want to say with Jonathan Taylor, one great thing about him is he just turned 21. And Scott really talks about this a lot, where we want our running backs to be young going into the NFL because teams aren't going to be looking to draft the older prospects at the running back position, just because by the time it comes to give them that second contract, there's zero reason to give a running back a second contract if they're already going to be 26, 27 years old. So for their career value, it's really great that Jonathan Taylor just turned 21.
Yeah, that's the same thing that Derrick Henry's running into. I think he'll be 26. I think he is 26.
Yeah.
And he's wanting Zeke money and a long-term contract, and he's probably not going to get that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just like the first thing we check on the box. And then I think for fantasy wise, the most important thing we're looking for is that just ability to be a three down running back, an ability to be a workhorse at the next level. And we see this with Jonathan Taylor because he has the body type. He's a prototypical three down running back. He has an 89 percentile BMI score. So that's just really important that he has the body to be able to hold up at the NFL level and be able to command a significant amount of touches. And he's really not going to wear down, except I hear a lot of people talking about just long-term concerns with him because of the amount of touches he's had in college. He's had close to 1,000 career touches. Does that concern you at all, or are we just going to overlook that?
Honestly, with running backs, college usage doesn't really concern me initially, because like you're basically going to be using a running back for the next like 4 or 5 years anyways.
Yeah.
And they're going to get the same production regardless of how much usage they got in college. It's once they get to that 4 or 5 year mark and they're in their second contract, and then that's when like that usage in college will really like take its toll on the body. But I'm not super concerned about it right now, especially in Dynasty rookie drafts. Like
Exactly. I
he's
completely
still going to
agree.
be
I
top
think it's
three.
just something people are using to knock against him because if we're into 2 years into his career and he's played a 14 game season and a 16 game season, nobody is ever going to be mentioning how many touches he's had in college. Everyone's just going to completely forget about it. But people are just kind of using that to just kind of point out a negative about him, even though in reality, for his short-term value, it doesn't really matter. And if you are concerned about it, it still doesn't really matter because you can draft him, see that massive production year one and year two. And then while everyone has forgotten about his career touches, if you are worried about it, you can then move on from it and you can trade him for a premium where, I mean, in reality, it probably doesn't matter. But
Yeah,
let's get into just real quick. Let's get into his production at Wisconsin because this is the most important part of his profile, in my opinion. And let me just go through 3 seasons, his rushing yard totals. 1,977 yards his freshman season, almost 2,200 yards his sophomore season, and I believe that was in 13 games too. And then a little over 2,000 yards his junior season. His touchdown numbers go 13, 16, 21. So this is a running back that has, I want to say, more production than anyone else in the class, at least throughout their career. Am I wrong in saying that?
yeah, I think it's by far he has the most production, especially out of the top 4 or 5 running
Oh,
backs.
definitely out of the top 4 or 5. But even in his last season, we see with Wisconsin, he had a 41.8% dominator rating, which just means he accounted for almost 42% of Wisconsin's total offense just through him. And we rarely see this at a program as big as Wisconsin. So this put him in the 93rd percentile. But I will argue that it's a lot more impressive than that 93rd percentile indicates, just because a lot of those players that are above him come from smaller colleges where they didn't really have the teammates to do anything with. And so his production, it just, I know we see productive Wisconsin running backs all the time. We see the Monte Ball, we see the Melvin Gordon, but I think it's a little bit different this time with Jonathan Taylor, just because he sustained that production throughout his entire career. He was efficient with that production, and he comes out and at the NFL Combine, he runs a 4.3940, which at that BMI, at that size, gives him a 99th percentile speed score. And Scott was giving me the numbers on the video that we made a couple of days ago about the running back combine. This just puts him in a class of really just the elite running backs with the Ezekiel Elliott's, with the Saquon Barkleys, and just shows that he's a top tier NFL running back. Now, we were talking about before we recorded this, I hadn't had the chance to watch any Jonathan Taylor film, but you told me you had the chance to go through, watch some of his bad games, watch some of his good games. What were your main takeaways coming away from that?
Yeah, so I have a few pros and a few cons. Like a lot of people were saying before the combine that they don't think he's like elite speed, which was nuts just watching him on tape. Like he has those huge big breakaway runs. I think he had a 72-yarder. I forget which game that was, but like he blew past everybody and then just dusted, like he was pulling away from all the people trying to chase him down. So he's got that breakaway speed. He's got extremely good contact balance. When he gets hit in the hole, he's gonna stay balanced and he's gonna get that extra yard or two. He's got a great stiff arm. And I think he's got underrated agility. I think he's got good side-to-side motion. He is that bigger guy. I know I might get some flack for this, but I think he's essentially what everybody wanted Leonard Fournette to be.
Yeah.
He's got the elite speed, but he's also got the side-to-side movement that Leonard Fournette lacks. And like Leonard Fournette wasn't necessarily known as a pass catching back coming out of college, but he's shown that he has, at least average hands. The cons with Taylor, I saw were that he's got kind of inconsistent hands. He did have, I think it's 4 drops in his junior season. He did have 26 catches though. So that like he's got kind of inconsistent hands. He's got a little bit of inconsistent vision. And that's something that he actually has been on record saying that he's got to work on, is his inconsistency with his vision. There was a few plays where if he just would have like looked up and maybe broken it to the right, he could have had a huge play against Ohio State in the first time they matched up this past year. He finished with like 50 yards in that game, and he probably could have taken that 50 yards to the house.
Yeah.
If he just would have seen that opening on the outside. But then there's the other times where he's running through the box, and he really has that good vision to cut it left or cut it right, stay behind his linemen, stuff like that. I do think he has the propensity to try and play home run ball. Sometimes he'll take an outside run and he'll instead of cutting it right up the field and getting 2 to 3 yards, he'll try and break it outside because he does have that home run speed, and he'll end up losing 3 to 4 yards. And so I think that's just a little inconsistency with his vision. Maybe he'll work on that, just some decision making. And then his biggest negative, in my opinion, is his fumbling. Not his pass catching hands, but his fumbling. I think he averaged 5 fumbles a season. In college, and that's something that statistically has followed players from college into the NFL. Zeke came out and he had a fumbling problem, and that followed him right into the NFL. I do believe he's gotten a little bit better over the past few years, but that's something that Jonathan Taylor definitely needs to work on, is ball security for sure.
Yeah, I think that's something he will be able to work on. I mean, he's a young kid. I mean, it's crazy to think that this player right now that we're talking about is younger than I am.
Yeah.
So in my mind, that's just boggling because I cannot imagine going to the NFL anytime soon. So I think he has plenty of time to work on the fumbling issues. I think that that's something teams are going to prioritize. And the thing with fumbling issues, at least with these top running backs for dynasty purposes, if a team takes Jonathan Taylor at the, I mean, we're going to get into this in a little bit, but where we think he's possibly going to go in the NFL draft, if they're taking him at the late first round, early second round, they're not going to be willing to pull him off the field really quick due to some fumbles. I mean, if they're taking him, they know about that problem. They know they're going to have to put up with it. But let me go back to what you said about comparing him to Leonard Fournette. And we didn't talk about this beforehand, but I love that comparison because I actually wrote that down whenever I was referencing his ability catching the ball. And I think that it's a perfect comparison where it's not necessarily his strength, but he's shown that he can do it, especially in his junior season, putting up a 76th percentile target share, and he had 26 receptions, 252 yards. So I think it's going to be really similar to Leonard Fournette and how we saw that running back kind of improve on that part of his game once he got to the NFL level, and he can do it. He doesn't have to be taken off the field on third down.
Yeah. I think Leonard Fournette had, I think, 100 targets on the season, which is insane. You know, like
Yeah.
that's Christian McCaffrey numbers of targets. And you know, he wasn't necessarily the most productive with it, but he caught the ball. That's all that you can ask.
Yeah.
And with Jonathan Taylor, I think he actually runs more routes out of the backfield than Leonard Fournette. If I remember right, I saw a few wheel routes where he would actually be targeted, you know, 20 yards down the field, and then he'd make a contested catch, and then fight his way into the end zone. And that's something that he's just really good at doing is just, you know, maintaining the balance through contact. And even when he's catching the ball, you know, it's contested catch, he's still remaining his balance, and then he's just fighting for extra yards after the catch.
Yeah, I love it. So now let's get into where we're going to see him in dynasty rookie drafts and where we're going to see him going in the NFL draft. And I'll say right now that he's the pre-draft clear RB1 unless we see one of these other top tier running backs go in and land in a fantastic spot like Kansas City or Baltimore. I think it's going to be safe to say that Jonathan Taylor is the running back one. But so let's kind of avoid that discussion unless do you have an objection to that? Do you have DeAndre Swift as number one?
Um, I don't think DeAndre Swift did anything at the combine that would remove him from people's number one dynasty
Okay. This is
rookie.
interesting. Okay, so
Um,
would you have Jonathan Taylor at your number two running back spot?
he's kind of like he's like my 1B. I'm just saying,
Okay.
like, some people might still consider DeAndre Swift as their one to Jonathan Taylor's two. Um, I still kind of have Swift above him because Jonathan Taylor does have a little bit of question marks with his pass blocking. That's something that, you know, he knows he has to work on. I mean, all the running backs in this draft class essentially have to work on it outside of DeAndre Swift and Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah.
You know, like, because they are, you know, the traditional three down back where they are in those downs where they're constantly up doing pass blocking and stuff like that. So they've worked on it throughout their entire college career. But yeah, they're definitely watching the film. Jonathan Taylor has some not he's not horrible, but he's not great at it.
Okay.
And so he definitely has to work on that. Um, and so I think DeAndre Swift gets the edge just based off of that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think maybe for the NFL, DeAndre Swift would be a better running back just because passing is so much more efficient and so much more important than the rushing part of the game. I just think that Jonathan Taylor has the profile to be like just have that volume where DeAndre Swift may have a higher ceiling. But anyway, let's get into where we could see Jonathan Taylor going in the NFL draft. And I was looking at a bunch of mock drafts before this, and after the NFL Combine, I'm seeing a lot of people slide Jonathan Taylor up into that late first round NFL draft pick range. And where before the NFL Combine, a lot of people had him in that early second round. Where do you think he goes around that. Do you see him as a first round player, or do you think he's still falls to the second round like a Nick Chubb?
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for the regret that some of these teams are having for drafting RBs too high or paying them too much, I think he could have easily been, like a top 20 pick in let's say 2 years ago, 3 years
Yeah.
ago, something like that. Um, so I think he could slide into the back end of the first round. I think some people have a mock to Tennessee if they don't end up signing Henry, which in my opinion I don't think is going to happen unless they tag him. Because he's just asking for way too much money, way too long of a contract for someone who's not even a traditional three-down back. And so I think he could slide in at the back end of the first round, maybe early second. And combine is always if you ball out at the combine like he did, that's definitely gonna be in the minds of the NFL GMs, and more than likely they'll slide him up their draft boards. So I could see him going to Tennessee I could see him going to Tennessee in the first round. I could see potentially, Atlanta in the second round. There's so many RB needy teams this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very likely we see him at the either very end of the first round or very beginning of the second round. But I do think just because of the round he's taken in and how the teams view, there's a big difference between the 30th overall pick and the 34th overall pick. It doesn't necessarily mean a big difference between like the end of the second and the third, but just because those first round contracts come with the 5th-year option, it's a big deal for a team to spend that investment on a player. So if we see Jonathan Taylor go in the first round, I think it's going to be a significant boost to his dynasty value. And here, tell me I'm crazy, but if he goes in the end of the first round to just an above average or even an average landing spot, these are the only running backs in Dynasty that I have ranked ahead of Jonathan Taylor. Saquon Barkley, CMC, Kamara, Zeke, and Dalvin Cook. End of list. I have him ahead of Chubb. I have him ahead of Mixon. I have him ahead of Josh Jacobs. I have him ahead of Miles Sanders. And I could even get crazier with this because the latest mock I checked was a Walter Football mock, and he had the Baltimore Ravens taking Jonathan Taylor. And in that situation, the only running backs I take ahead of him in Dynasty are Barkley and CMC. Am I just off the wall in thinking that?
If he goes to the Ravens, I think I'm a little less high on him than other people, just because he's not going to be used in that three down back role. He'll be the first down, second down. He's going to get all those touches, but they really didn't use that like pass catching back role that much, or at least as much as people expected. Man, I would say he's after Mixon, but before all the other guys you said.
See, my thing with Mixon is I love Mixon. I love the talent. I've loved Mixon for years. It's just he's coming to the point where he's about to be on a second NFL contract. So if I could
but he's
pivot
only
off
23.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
it does. I know he's young. I know I have Joe Mixon on. I have more Joe Mixon on more dynasty teams than I do not have him on. I am a massive Joe Mixon fan, but I just get really worried when it comes to these running backs getting on their second contract, just because in recent history, how many running backs have we seen get on their second contract and have success for longer than 1 to 2 years? And that's my thing. So I see Joe Mixon as, even if he balls out in 2020, I don't think that he can be a top 5 dynasty pick. Whereas I think if Jonathan Taylor does, he has the ceiling to be in that area.
Yeah, I mean, he could definitely, if Jonathan Taylor balls out and Joe Mixon balls out, then over the next 5 years, Jonathan Taylor's value will stay higher than Joe Mixon's, just because like he is 3-4 years younger than Joe Mixon. Um, so I guess I guess I could see that. I guess in this next season, unless he goes to the Chiefs or, maybe even Atlanta. Atlanta's,
Atlanta
has
would be a great spot.
yeah, Atlanta's produced a top RB before. In this current system that they have. Uh, and so if we went to one of the places like that, then yeah, I'd slide him in probably the top 5.